Greetings and welcome to Sports 101, the sports show that discusses sports beyond the X's and O's. We expand our conversation to include the history, past, present, and in the making of sport. We also evaluate people, places, and perspectives of the game. I am your host, Jamar Harp. Be sure to follow me at Coach_Harp412 on Twitter and make sure you get social with our show and SportsZone Chicago. You can follow SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone Chicago, on Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram under SportsZone Chicago. Remember, SportsZone Chicago is your number one sports talk app. You can watch and listen to my show as well as a variety of other shows listed on YouTube and Facebook. Keep up with breaking sport news, and if you missed this show, again, you can always check us out again on YouTube and Facebook. Tonight, I would like to talk to you about Soul on Ice, Africans and their presence in North American soccer. Last week, October 6, 2020, the NHL had its 2020 entry draft. The first two picks, which are normally Canadian, were the same way this time, except there was a caveat emptor. The second pick was of African descent. The first two picks were Alex Lafreniere, who was a right winger. He's pictured above, along with Quentin Byfield, who was the number 2 pick. Now, Quentin is a 6'4", 215-pound center. He's 18 years old, and he's, the highest player ever drafted of African descent. Former players drafted before him were Evander Kane in 2009 by the Atlanta Thrashers and Seth Jones in 2013 by the Nashville Predators. Both were selected number 4 in their year's draft, respectively. After Byfield was selected, a lot of people sent out tweets of congratulations. Magic Johnson, again, he was signed by the Los Angeles Kings, which is a major market, and he's expected to be the new Wayne Gretzky and take this team to heights unparalleled. Kane retweeted congratulations on being the second overall selection and becoming the highest drafted black player in history. Now, let me tell you a little something about Quentin Byfield. Again, he's an 18-year-old Canadian hockey player who's 6'4" and 215. He is considered to be the next Evgeny Malkin or Eric Lindros, and that's due to his speed, his agility, his counterattack, and his excellent stick moves. To be such a big man, he has very soft hands. In 2018, he was the first pick in the OHL draft and Rookie of the Year of the Canadian Hockey League. The OHL was the top league in Canada and is known for sending future Hall of Famers to the National Hockey League. In 2018, he scored 29 goals and 61 points in only 64 games. 29 goals and 61 points in only 64 games. In 2019, he competed in the Hlinka Gretzky Cup, which is an international under-18 tournament. Canada unfortunately lost to Germany in the final, but he did rack up a lot of good positive play. Quentin's father is of Jamaican descent and is a former track athlete as well as soccer athlete who moved to Canada for work. His mother is a former Canadian soccer player on the high school level, and she also played basketball. Once he joins the Kings, again, being 18, he may not play this year, but once he joins the Kings, he's expected again to have a Gretzky-like impact on the franchise. When Wayne Gretzky came from Canada to the Los Angeles Kings, which is one of the top media markets, again, in the United States, he brought added scrutiny as well as media presence to the team. Going over some former players of African descent in the NFL, I'd like to start off with Willie O'Ree. Now, Willie O'Ree is considered the Jackie Robinson of hockey. He was the first black player in the NFL. In the NHL. He broke in 1957 with the Boston Bruins. Willie had a 5-year stint in the league, and which was shortened because before he got to the league in 1955, he took a puck to the eye and was blind in one eye. However, he held this information within so he can get drafted. After being let go by the Boston Bruins, Willie O'Ree played in the minors until 1979, eventually becoming an NHL scout and he currently now works with the NHL Diversity Initiative. He also was inducted into the Black Canadian Hockey Hall of Fame. Our next athlete we would like to mention is Grant Fuhr. Grant Fuhr is one of the greatest goalies of all time, and he's the first goalie of African descent in the NHL. He was also the first one to win a Stanley Cup in 1984 for the Edmonton Oilers, excuse me. He also was the first black athlete inducted into the NHL Hall of Fame. We have Val James. He was the first American-born black to play in the NHL. Even though he was born in America, he trained and played in Canada. Dirk Graham. He was the first to be named team captain for your Chicago Blackhawks. He was the captain of the Hawks from 1989 to 95, and he was the first African player to win the Selke Trophy, which is presented to the best defensive player. He won this award in 1990. He also matriculated to be the head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks for 1 year in 1998-99. I'd like to also introduce the audience to Mike Greer. He was the first black player born and trained in America to play in the NHL. He made his debut in 1996 and 97. A fun fact about Mike Greer is he is the nephew of Rosie Greer. Rosie Greer made fame for being one of the linemen of the fearsome foursome of the Rams defense back in the 60s and 70s. After his playing days, he became the bodyguard for Robert Kennedy's wife, Ethel, and he was actually guarding her when she was assassinated in Los Angeles due to 1968. If you didn't know, Robert Kennedy was assassinated due to his involvement with the criminal enterprises, and particularly the American mafia in the United States. Jerome McGinley is another famous NHL player of African descent. He is the Calgary Flames all-time leading in goals, points, and games played. He is the first black NHL player to win the Art Ross Trophy. The Art Ross Trophy goes to the leading point scorer, and he also was the first to win the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy that goes to the leading scorer of the NHL. He accomplished both these feats in 2002. In 2002, he also competed in the Winter Olympics for Canada and became the first black man to win any gold medal in the Winter Olympics. There's a litany of current players in the NFL of African descent, which include Evander Kane, Seth Jones, J.T. Brown, Wayne Simmons, Devontae Smith-Pelly, P.K. Subban, and his little brother Malcolm, who was again a goalie for your Blackhawks. There's also some up-and-coming women in the game who are striving to make changes of African descent. And I would like to highlight these ladies as well. I would like to give a special shout out to these two because they compete for the Pittsburgh Penguins women's under 18 team in my hometown, and they are Shayla Edwards. She's a defender, and she's actually on the under 19 now. She's a student. She was a former student at Shady Side Academy who participated in USA Hockey's under 18 development player camp, and she's headed to the University of Wisconsin to play defense for them in the fall. Our next women's soccer player I would like to mention is Rayla Clemens. Rayla Clemens also plays for the Pittsburgh Penguins Elite under 19 team. However, she's a center, so she controls the flow of the game and tries to distribute to her wingers and sometimes trailing defensemen for that long slap shot. Rayla, she lives in Detroit, and she's a true sign of dedication. She gets up every Sunday and drives 4 hours from Detroit to Pittsburgh to practice with her hockey team. During the weeks that she's not available to travel, she practices with a men's team, the Little Caesars AAA under 18 midgets boys team. With this experience and playing hockey, this past season, she was able to establish 15 goals and 7 assists in 34 games with the Penguins. Like her counterpart, she is going to Syracuse in the fall. Again, we've just looked at a litany of players who currently in the National Hockey League of African descent. We've talked about the first, and after a short break, I would like to come back and give you the origins of the nature and game of hockey in North America. A lot of people think that the common misconception is that yes, it was developed in Canada, but it was developed by individuals of African descent who came from the United States via the Underground Railroad. So, if you would give us a short break, please listen to our sponsors' announcements and stay with us in Sports Zone Chicago when I come back and we will talk about the African origins of hockey in North America. Please stay tuned and I'll be with you in a few seconds.
Compassion, noun. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. We're all born with it. It's in us. Don't believe me? When you hear a baby cry, something pulls at you. You want to ease that pain. You want to soothe that hurt. No one had to teach you that. It's called compassion, and it's in you. However, at some point you turned it off when it came to me.
Me. The cries of my soul have gone unheard, but today, you will hear me.
My heart has wailed a melody loud enough to shatter your ears and you ignored me. But this week, you will hear me.
This body has beat the drums of anguish, only to be silenced. But this month, you will hear me.
This year,
This decade,
This century,
I will be heard. And
you will be the one to hear me.
and when I am finally heard,
Show compassion.
show compassion.
show compassion.
Remember, it's in you.
Greetings and welcome back. I am Jamar Harp, and this is Sports 101, the sports show that discusses sport beyond the X's and O's as we talk about the game from a people, places, and perspective look through the lens of history, past, present, and in the making. Again, please make sure to get social with this show and the various other shows provided by SportsZone Chicago. Some of my favorites are Sean and Maya in the morning, What's Up Cuz, and the Humidor podcast on the weekends. Again, you can follow SportsZone Chicago on Twitter at SportsZone Chicago, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram under SportsZone Chicago. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and search SportsZone Chicago, but most importantly, please download the SportsZone Chicago app via iTunes, Google Play, or the Amazon store. Thank you for tuning in to this week's show as we talk about the African origins of North American hockey. As we look at the sports perspective in North America, most people tier the sports. Football, basketball, and baseball usually end up being the top three. The goal in this show is to provide a historical basis to show the African development of of hockey in North America. By teaching children and the listening audience about this involvement, it is my hope, as well as Sports Zone Chicago and our sponsors, that we can promote the game of hockey to the African and Afro Latino community in the United States. Oftentimes, hockey is only played in the Northeast corridors and in some Midwest states. However, if we demonstrate that, again, the African origins of hockey in North America, it is my hope that the game spreads and permeates in the inner city. Before we left, we talked about the various players who are currently in the NHL, as well as the first player of African descent, Willie O'Ree, to break the color line. Now we'll talk to you about the African origins of hockey. Modern hockey's birth comes from the Africans who settled in Nova Scotia. West Africans were brought as slaves both in early British and French colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries. If you know anything about history, I'm invoking references from the French and Indian War. Both Britain and France were fighting for colonial power, not only in America, but Canada as well. There was a second migration of Africans in Nova Scotia, which happened after the American Revolution. The British had promised the enslaved Africans in America freedom and evacuated thousands of enslaved Africans who fled to the British lines during the war. Approximately 3,000 Africans in America, former slaves, were resettled in Nova Scotia after the war, where they were known as Black Loyalists. A key fact about the Black Loyalists is this is a group that includes the Merchant Marines. The Merchant Marines burnt down the White House and are the individuals referenced by Francis Scott Key and the Star Spangled Banner in the second and third stanzas. You also had an immigration of Jamaican Maroons to Nova Scotia. In particular, Africville is the picture that you see above. Again, to have a tie to their native homeland, they named their neighborhood or community Africville. There was another major migration after the War of 1812, again with Africans in America escaping slavery and in the United States and heading to Canada through the Underground Railroad. There was also a large proportion that came and gained passage on British ships. Again, the British had a rule that if you broke lines and sided with the British and became a loyalist, they would remove you from America. Now, the 3,000 that they took to Nova Scotia, a lot of them end up settling in Sierra Leone, a colony that was set up in West Africa, similar to how the United States set up Liberia. When the British brought these former enslaved Africans to Canada, they created institutions, sort of like historically black colleges and universities were created in the United States. These institutions were mainly educational and religious based. Some of their names include the Royal Arcadian School and the African Baptist Church, which was founded in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Halifax, Nova Scotia was a main hub for Africans to come to, um, which was founded in 1832 and again established by former enslaved Africans. During the years before the Civil War in America, there was an estimate of approximately 10 to 30,000 Africans who migrated to Canada through various reasons. Again, most of them came in small numbers as they had to travel through the Underground Railroad and stay in people's houses, etc., to make their way up to north, following the proverbial North Star to freedom. Once they did get to Canada, many of them settled in Africville, which was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Um, and what they did is they start bending up churches and schools. If you can look at the picture right here, this sort of kind of reminds you of New Orleans post Katrina. What you see right here is the port of Halifax and Nova Scotia, which is a current picture. This was built up again for tourism as well as other economic reasons that will provide a stimulus to the Canadian economy. This picture right here is an old picture of Africville and Halifax, Nova Scotia. As you can see, as I mentioned, the rail line is coming through there, and this is going to be kind of the end to this neighborhood. Sort of like how the black communities in the United States were redeveloped due to redlining and building highways. Um, what happened is, and here again, there's another picture. You can see Nova Scotia, and you see this small circle that's Africville right there, and that's right at the port. What happened is, port is very busy and brings in a lot of money. So the first, let's drop these settlers here. It's right by the water. They can tend to it, help us when the ships come off. Again, invoking the reference of New Orleans post Katrina. Now it's turned into more of a luxury site, as you saw the Carnival Cruise Lines and other business entities that visit the port of Nova Scotia for economic reasons. Now let's get back to these uh, freed Africans who've traveled to Nova Scotia to start a new life. Um, Many of them, again, went to these religious and educational institutions set up by Britain, and what they did was they found out again. Um, I was formerly enslaved. I'm free now. I don't have to do things the way I'm told. So a lot of the men weren't going to church. So a lot of the church founders, what they did was they would play games of hockey after church between rival churches to entice the men to come. Um, Hockey was also established by baseball in Canada. By the mid 1880s, there was a lot of all black baseball clubs throughout Nova Scotia and other parts of eastern Canada. One famous one was the Chatham Colored All Stars. These clubs, excuse me, competed on a barnstorming circuit, just playing anywhere and everywhere, touring the Canadian countryside. Most of the clubs became year-round semi-pro sports organizations because once the ice froze, the clubs would move from baseball to hockey. Hence, where the slap shot was invented, and that's something that we'll go over later. Um, with these clubs transferring to baseball to hockey in the winter, they formed the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes in 1895. So basically, it was a colored hockey league around the coast of Nova Scotia and eastern Canada, where a lot of the enslaved Africans end up residing. The league, here's a picture of some of the founders of the league, as well as some of the athletes. The Color Hockey League of the Maritimes, again, was founded in 1895 by Pastor James Borton of Dartmouth Church, James R. Kinney, a Cornwallis Street layman, and he later became the first black graduate of the Maritime Business School in Nova Scotia. James Robinson Johnston, who was the first black graduate of the Dartmouth University Law Program, and Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian law student at Dalhousie University, who later became the founder of the first Pan African Conference, which was established in 1900. These players, as well as owners, were also influenced by the writings of the famous contemporary Booker T. Washington, who had a famous quote that they lived by, which goes as following: I have learned that success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed. These gentlemen took this to heart again because they overcame a lot of obstacles, um, being kidnapped or their family members being kidnapped, brought to a foreign land, working in the chattel slavery system, having a internal fortitude to realize it was inaccurate and they needed to escape, and then making a long trek from whatever southern state that they were in all the way to Nova Scotia, which is a very dangerous and perilous journey. So these athletes took this quote by Booker T. Washington by heart and used it to enhance themselves, not only in sport, but in life. These athletes emphasize sportsmanship and athleticism instead of force. What does that mean? So they didn't play the traditional dump and chase style of hockey that many people see in the NHL and Canada now. They played a more open, freestyle, fluid form of the game. They also use hockey as a catalyst for equality. These gentlemen believe that by showing their athletic prowess on the rink, they will be able to gain acceptance from their contemporaries who oftentimes impose racism on them due to the color of their skin. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, and they were still systematically pressed, and it still goes on today in Canada with the African players in regards to the racial taunts, things being thrown at them, etc. The Canadian Hockey League, or the Colored Hockey League in Canada, expanded from a humble three-team league, which its mating club was the Dartmouth Jubilees, to include a litany of black clubs throughout Eastern Canada. Most of these clubs, the players again played baseball and hockey, and had a duality throughout the year. These clubs include the Africville Seasiders, the Truro Victorias, the Charlottetown West End Rangers, the Amherst Royals, and the Hammonds Plains Mossbacks. Again, a lot of these clubs come from a baseball background. So they took their baseball experience and brought it to the rink. The slap shot, which is one of the most famous shots and hardest to do in hockey with such a small net, was credited to Henry Braces Franklin. Um, Again, he was a player in the Colored Hockey League, and he invented the slap shot, which wasn't being used by the European leagues in Canada at the time. Another intervention of the Colored Hockey League that is now used in the NHL is a goalie dropping to the ice to defend the puck. Again, in Canada and everywhere else that played hockey, this was against the rules, but the athleticism and the free flowing style of play of the Colored Hockey League brought these things out, which permeated into the current game of the National Hockey League, which obviously shows the influence that the Colored Hockey League had on the NHL. The Dartmouth Jubilees were said to have a goalie that was 4 feet tall and that he lived on the ice due to his height. So it was very easy for him to get down and trap the puck. Um, the teams in the Colored Hockey League were only permitted access to arenas after their European counterparts were finished with their seasons. This caused a problem because, as you know, as winter goes on, it turns into spring. And at some point, the ice would get mushy and wasn't available to skate on. Um, so what happened is they would play a limited 8-week schedule. Think of it as an NBA bubble, except in an ice rink. Um, They had limited playing time to play these games, so you might have double and triple headers at night. And what happened is they would take two or three teams from each region in Canada and make a playoffs with about a half dozen teams to determine the top honors. Obviously, disputes arose because it wasn't formally done as to which teams would get the right to go to the playoffs and compete for the championship. Throughout this great success and innovation, the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes ultimately ended up declining, similar to our Negro National League of Baseball. Um, Again, as I stated earlier, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, there were disputes over the expansion of the rail service out to Port of Halifax as Canada start to progress after the Civil War. Their racial identity began to strengthen, as well as nationalism, which is pride and love for one's country. This nationalism spurned business interests. So the Africans who lived in Halifax, again, as you can see the picture right here of the rail line going through their neighborhood, were displaced. Um, Again, this is not something new. We saw this in many walks of life in many different countries. That there's one area that the individuals of African descent are settled in, and due to economic or political reasons, they're moved out and the area is redeveloped and made nicer for a different race. Many of these hockey players and baseball players became displaced from their families in Africville, so they had to move. Many of them moved to Toronto because it's not too far. Um, Again, rink owners start to invoke more issues of racism. They refused to rent the rinks to the colored hockey league even after they were done to make extra money. Um, Again, nationalism was growing in Canada, so they started to invoke that on the individuals of African descent and make them feel second class and inferior, similar to what they experienced in the United States. Um, they tried to give the rinks to the players once the ice started to melt, but it was too mushy for them to skate and it would cause injury. So the Colored Hockey League of the Maritimes was forced back to local ponds and to barnstorm until the weather cleared up. Um, After World War One, there was another sweep of nationalism and pride, and the black teams such as the Halifax Diamonds, the Halifax Wizards, the New Glasgow Speed Boys, and the Africville Bound Bombers would compete in various leagues in Barnstorm all the way up until 1930. Um, Moving forward, uh, to celebrate this renaissance in African soccer, um, currently to commemorate the success of the Colored Hockey League, as well as the involvement of individuals of African descent from both countries in North America, United States, and Canada. There's a Beantown Classic being played with an all-black under 20 team with American and Canadian individuals of African descent. This team is again developed, sort of think of it like the Harlem Globetrotters of hockey. They're used as a marketing wing, and they go out and play individuals. Mike Greer is one of their coaches, a former NHLer that we talked about earlier, and their goal again is to promote the sport of promote the sport of hockey to individuals in the African diaspora. Um, I'd like to leave you guys with some quick thoughts. Um, when you open your mind to sports and know history and innovation, it doesn't allow you to be closed minded. As a professional that works in the sports industry, I meet a lot of children whose only focus is football and basketball. However, we've contributed to lots of other sports, and if our community knew about these contributions, it is my opinion that the children will follow and try to emulate themselves in these sports. If you look at Quentin Byfield and a lot of the other individuals of African descent that played in the NHL, the reason they did it is because, as growing up in Canada, um, hockey is the national pastime. So regardless of your race, as a Canadian citizen, you flock to the game. The individuals of African descent in Canada have a strong examples to look at who look like them and they can emulate. So again, if we were able to develop this, and not only in hockey, but a lot of the sports that we quote unquote do not play on the level that we do baseball, football, and basketball, you know, we would have a greater impact on the sports world uh, in particular. My interest in hockey stems from my upbringing in Pittsburgh, PA. I was fortunate enough to grow up and have a good hockey team in my area. The Penguins would win at that time. We would have French media come down to interview Lemieux and some of our other well-known players, and that developed my love for hockey. Obviously, I do not play the game, but I am an avid enthusiast and do like to watch. Um, so it is my hope that there's other individuals that pick up not only an interest for hockey again, but other sports that are quote unquote non-traditional in the African diaspora community, so that we can flourish. Um, Thank you for tuning in with me on this show. I had a lot of information prepared for you guys, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I always enjoy doing this, and I have to learn how to curtail my excitement and slow down and give you proper information in a way that you can take notes and maybe look it up later. But I do thank you for joining me on this journey to learn about the African contributions to North American hockey. Thank you for tuning in this evening to Sports 101 with me, Jamar Harp, and be sure to follow me again on Twitter at Coach_Hart412. Make sure to get social with SportsZone Chicago and its litany of shows, which can be followed on Twitter at SportsZone Chicago, Facebook at SportsZone Chicago, and Instagram under the same moniker, SportsZone Chicago. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, search Sports Zone Chicago, and most importantly, please download the app. The Sports Zone Chicago app can be found in the iTunes Store, Google Play, and Amazon. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I would like to see you next week when we talk about our next episode in the sports culture and history of sport and its involvement in the African diaspora community. Thank you so much for joining me, and I wish you a great night.
See me.
See me.
See me. See my dark skin and my kinky hair.
See me.
Don't see past me.
Don't see through me.
See me.
See my tan skin and my curly hair.
See me.
Don't see past me.
Don't see through me.
See me.
See my face, wet with tears from years of oppression.
See my hands, weathered and worn from decades of pulling myself up through your society.
See my feet split from centuries of walking your delicate line.
See me.
See me.
See me.
I'm tired.
I'm tired.
I'm tired.